And we're off and rolling on the Krueger Show, 8:06 on the West Coast, 6 minutes after 11 on the East Coast. Happy August 21st, 2024. Thanks for checking out the Krueger Show on YouTube, brought to you by Pig and a Pickle, the best barbecue in all of Northern California. Check them out. They're in Emeryville. They're in Corte Madera. They're open 7 days a week from 11 a.m. till 8 p.m. or until they run out. Go say hi to Damon and Mary. Get some brisket and tell them that Krueger sent you. We're also brought to you by Sharp Corner Sports Cards and Collectibles. They're at 205 Cypress Avenue in Pacific Grove, California, on the Monterey Peninsula. Call my friend Anthony Catania at 831-521-5264. And as you see at the top of the screen, our brand new sponsor is Mancini Sleepworld, a proud sponsor of the Krueger Show. I'm loving my Mancini's bed. I've got a brand new Mancini's bed that's about 6.5 feet off the ground. I almost need to be like a pole vaulter to get up onto the bed. But Mancini's offers a 120-night guarantee with a range of brands and price points. And with Mancini's, you get free next-day delivery. Click the link below. Go to sleepworld.com, and you can find a bed that works for you, whether shopping online or visiting in store. If you're a Krueger Show viewer, you get 10% off. All you got to do is type in Krueg10 and as your code, Krueg10, Krueg 10, and online or in store, and you get 10% off. Once again, that's Krueg 10 to get 10% off in store or online at sleepworld.com. Jordan Elliott's in the house from NBC Sports Bay Area. He's done an incredible job covering all sports there, but we really love him on the Niners, and he's been down at training camp this summer, and so we thought, let's get him on the show. We used to have him on all the time and kind of bend his ear and pick his brain on what he sees. And here he is. So, Jordan, good to see you, man. Thanks for jumping on the Krueger Show. Man, you were back with us when we were in our outset, when we were having, 2,000, 3,000 subs, 4,000, just getting started. And I always wanted to say I appreciated you then, and I really did, and appreciate you now. And we're glad that we got this thing rolling. We have a bigger audience to watch you join us and espouse your views on football. But welcome back, man. And you've been down in Santa Clara. What have the Niners looked like to you? There's a lot of people saying this is going to be doom and gloom. Others are a little bit more optimistic. Where do you kind of sit on your 49er thoughts as we approach the season?
Yeah, I think it's really easy for everything to seem doom and gloom when you're coming off a Super Bowl loss and you're like so close to being reigning Super Bowl champions. Because let's be honest, if they had won the Super Bowl, this holdout fiasco and some of the injuries and some of that stuff, it would still be unfortunate. But I don't think people would be nearly as pessimistic about things if they're coming off a Super Bowl win. So I think a lot of it just ties back to the fact that they fell short last season. And I think a lot of 49ers fans know that it's extremely difficult to get over the mountaintop and win a Super Bowl. They've been so close 4 out of the last 5 seasons. It unfortunately hasn't happened for them yet. So I do understand the kind of, reluctance to be fully optimistic and just, over the top excited about the season, given the way the last one ended and given the way that the beginning of this one has unfolded. But for me, from just a pure football standpoint, it looks like a really good football team. Even with a couple of key guys not being there, they still look like a really good football team. And hopefully if they're able to get them back in the mix, they'll be an even better football team. But to me, this still looks like a team that's going to be among the top 3 or 4 in the league. Until proven otherwise is the class of the NFC. I know there's a couple other teams, mainly Detroit, where I'm looking at and I'm like, this might be a year where that hierarchy shifts a little bit. But all in all, I think that the outlook should be fairly positive once football actually starts being played, because I think once this team hits the ground running, they're going to look really good and kind of pick up where they left off last year.
Are you of the belief that there's a lot of last dance talk about this team, and which doesn't fit because they haven't really won any titles, but it also doesn't fit, I don't think, because I just, I can pull up the depth chart right now, and where's the age? I mean, Trent Williams is older. There's a couple guys, and Kittle's 30. There's a couple guys who are like 28, but I mean, I don't, people who say this is the last dance and talk about the age of the roster, I don't know, man. I'm not with you on this one. I mean, there's Trent, there's a couple guys, but the vast majority of the players on this team are younger players. I don't see this as like a last hurrah type situation.
Yeah, I really don't either. Especially, with football, there's so much roster turnover year to year anyway that I feel like the last dance stuff, when you're talking about it obviously always ties back to Jordan's Bulls and that last run they had in '98. Basketball is much more of like a player centric dynasty, whereas I feel with football, there's obviously the blue chip talent that are your foundational pieces, but it's much more organizational structure, in my opinion, where that's really what sets the tone for a dynasty. Whereas in basketball, it's so player driven that when you do start getting guys that are aging or who are on their way out, it's a lot more difficult to kind of replenish that roster and reinforce it with younger talent that's going to make an impact. In football, I think it's much easier to have a really good draft, which, I know we'll probably get into it later. Like, it looks like the Niners have another good one on the way this season after a couple that maybe weren't as good as people would have hoped. And I think that that's the main difference for me, where I'm kind of hesitant to call it a last dance, just because organizationally they're still scouting well, they're still drafting well. Shanahan's still there. They still have a pretty good track record of these assistants that they're promoting, and these internal hires that they're making. So there might be a couple guys who are gone next season, but I don't think it means that they're not going to be a contender next season, or they're going to have this, massive, drastic drop off if a couple guys do depart next season.
You mentioned Shanahan. He went on KMBR 680, and of course they asked about Aiyuk and Trent, and he said, "Hey, no new updates. They're having good communication with Trent." Deshaun Jackson seemed to think that Trent's going to be in Niner camp in a short amount of time. It's weird that, Trent held out, Aiyuk's holding in. You would think that maybe the Niners would have warmer thoughts about Aiyuk, but it almost sounds like, listen to Shanahan, that they have warmer thoughts and more optimistic thoughts about Trent signing than Aiyuk signing. And yet if you look at the latest, on the Aiyuk situation, it sounds like there's a lot of people that believe that the most likely scenario is that he returns to the 49ers and ultimately signs. What do you think, Jordan? I mean, was this inevitable because of the talent on the roster and Purdy getting paid next year? Or is this, the 49ers kind of the curse of me, where they're now, each guy's thinking more about themselves than about the team goals? How do you view these holdouts this summer?
I think it was inevitable, but I don't think that this scenario, the way it played out, was inevitable. Like, I feel like this is very unprecedented, where you're having a player of this caliber who's coming off a second team All-Pro season, where there's still trade speculation, and it's like not an outright trade me, I want off this team. It's like kind of like a, hey, trade me if you won't pay me, but I would also like to get paid and could stay here. Like, I can't remember a scenario ever like this, really, with a player of this caliber this late into training camp, into the preseason. So it was going to happen in a certain way where guys would want their money and guys would want to get paid, which they should. Like, I definitely think in a sport like football, where the shelf life is typically really short and you may not get the chance for a second or third big contract, I respect players wanting to get their money and wanting to get what they're worth. And this just unfortunately comes back to, when you're a really good football team, this is the problem that they face, and this is why you see a lot of teams not really have sustained runs of success, because they'll get a lot of talent and it's very hard to retain it all. And, I just think the 49ers are in a spot now where if they had a more proven option to replace somebody like that right away, maybe they'd be a little bit firmer on their stance of, this is where we are and this is what we're going to pay you, and if you don't want it, we'll trade you. But it feels like there's still a lot of room for compromise on both sides, and it's just like, when's it going to happen, right? Like, I feel like it's like it feels like we're so close, Larry, but it's like not happening yet. And then today there's a report, I believe it was Mike Garafolo. I believe, sorry, I was off today, so I was just scrolling on Twitter and saw where it's like they're still kind of far apart, where it felt like 2 days ago the reports we were getting was that they were like right there and it's almost going to happen. So who knows even what to believe at this point. It just feels like a situation where it's going to play out when it plays out. And I think that the rest of the 49ers and Shanahan are just like, hey, we have a season to prepare for. We're going to control what we can control. And until further notice, I think that's basically what they have to do.
It's interesting because, the guy from Pittsburgh who's been reporting that this is going to be a done deal is saying, he's still going to the Steelers and it's going to be on the eve of the season for a second and a third. It just seems like the window to trade him is probably closed. And if you're only going to get back 2025 draft capital, it's going to be a largely unpopular trade with everybody, the fans, the players, the media. So it probably would be best if John Lynch just didn't pull the trigger on that. Kyle Shanahan was asked by KNBR how much the starters are going to play. He says the goal is to play the starters in just the first half. I said he'd love to play the starters about a quarter and a half if he could time it right and get everybody off the field at the right time. He took a lot of criticism for how much he played Purdy against Tennessee. He was asked about, the criticism that he received, and he said that he felt like the criticism that the people who were criticizing him were a little too dramatic. I that was my take as well. I mean, Purdy was out there for 3 series. It's NFL football. You're always going to take a couple hits. He didn't take 5 hits. He took like 2 or 3 hits, and none of them looked like crushing. It wasn't like anybody bounced on him or anything. So, I mean, was it ideal? No, but, he needs to play. It's the second of 3 preseason games. He played 3 series. He took a couple hits. I don't know. To me, it's to get too exercised about, Brock Purdy. Are you telling me that Kyle Shanahan in the second of 3 preseason games played Brock Purdy 3 series and he took a couple of hits? I mean, it's like, we're talking about football. I mean, it's like you're always going to take a couple hits. I don't know. What was your feeling on how teams ought to utilize these games? McVay sits everybody until week 1. Shanahan kind of goes the other direction and believes these guys need to play football to get sharp at playing football. Where are you on this, Jordan?
I think it's all circumstantial, and I think the biggest circumstance that dictated last week was just the fact that they had those joint practices canceled. I think if they had those joint practices and they went reasonably well and there was, it wasn't a total disaster, I don't think that Purdy would have played more than maybe a series. Maybe he would have thrown him out there for the first drive and then pulled him off after. But I do think that we have to look at the inverse of this, right? Like, let's say he sits Purdy for the entire preseason, he sits the starters all preseason, and then week 1 against the Jets, they come out flat and they don't look good. Then the criticism is going to be, well, you didn't play them at all in the preseason. Like, what were you thinking? Now he's rusty coming into the season. So it's like, it feels like a lose-lose situation no matter what. And I think that once it was clear that Purdy was taking some hits and was probably under more fire than you'd want a guy to be in a game that doesn't count, they got him off the field pretty quickly. And I think that they adjusted accordingly and made that judgment call due to that. But at the same time, too, one of the things that I think makes Purdy such a valuable player is he is a competitor, and he is a guy where I don't think that there was any reluctance from him whatsoever about playing a preseason game. Like, to him, he even said it after the game. It's like, football is football. Like, if I'm playing a preseason game or a regular season game or I'm in practice, like, I'm going to get hit. It's a physical sport. And I think having that mentality makes it easier for Shanahan to say, hey, like, I'm going to throw you out there for a few series in a game that ultimately doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. And we can't quantify how much his reps in that game is going to help him once the regular season starts. But based on Purdy's own words, it helped him feel like he was getting back into a rhythm, and it helped him feel the speed of an NFL game, which you'd like to think practice can replicate, but it's really difficult to replicate a game environment. And even though it's a game that doesn't matter, it still is a step above practice in that regard in my eyes. So I think what they did was okay. I think it would have been a lot different if you left him out there for a predetermined amount of time and he was out there for, like, let's say the whole first half, and he just kept taking hit after hit after hit. Then I think it would be time to have some discourse about, hey, what are you doing? Like, this is your franchise quarterback. This team's in win now mode. No offense. I know Josh Dobbs looked really good, but if Josh Dobbs is your quarterback all season, what's your outlook looking like? So I think that they did a good job of protecting him from any, major injury. And once they saw that the offense wasn't really going anywhere, they're like, hey, you know what? We'll regroup. Let's get it right when we go to Vegas and play the Raiders for the last one.
Yeah, I don't want to say it's absolutely nothing, but I think it's pretty much and much ado about nothing. What kind of year do you expect Brock to have this year?
He set the franchise record for passing yards last year, was an MVP candidate for the majority of the season, looked really good. The only game I thought he really didn't look great in from pretty much the entirety of the game was that Ravens game on Christmas. And the Ravens are a really good team. They just, for whatever reason, that game didn't work out. He was really good last year. So I think even if he has a slightly worse year statistically, like, that's something that you would take if you're the 49ers, because it still should put you in a great position. If we're talking purely production, it might be hard to eclipse some of those numbers he put up last year, just simply based on how good he was last season. But overall, as a player, like, The guy's made 21 regular season starts. Like, there's still plenty of room to get better. One of the things that's driven me nuts since this guy took over, Larry, is all of the discourse, and it's more national than I think local. I think 49ers fans and people here, local media, understand the talent that's there. But nationally, all you hear is, when's Purdy going to regress? When's he going to, come back down to earth? When's he going to turn into a pumpkin? And it's like, what if he gets better with more experience? Like, he's looking this good right off the bat. His first career start, he's going up against, the best quarterback of all time in many people's eyes, and he didn't flinch. He came out and he was throwing dots and he just hit the ground running. Why wouldn't he get better with more experience? And so for me, I'm taking an optimistic approach where I'm like, with more experience, I expect him to get better and I expect him to improve in certain things. He's seeing more coverages. He's seeing more things that defenses are going to throw at him. So even if the production isn't there, I think we'll see a more complete quarterback on film. And I think that's really encouraging for the 49ers.
You weren't there today, but the highlight of today's practice, so there's probably two. One was a Renardo Green man-to-man coverage against I believe I think it was Bell underneath at the goal line, and he had a nice PBU. But the bigger play today was a corner route from Tanner Mordecai to Jacob Cowing, and it was just an absolute dime. Right over the coverage, right into his lap. I mean, it was a 35-yard handoff. It was such a beautiful play. What was your thought of watching Mordecai? And it's like, if the Niners hadn't come up with Brock Purdy, I probably wouldn't be this kind of enamored with Tanner Mordecai. But, the fact is they did. And then when I asked Greasy about Mordecai, the Greasy was in charge of looking at all the quarterbacks that were going to be like round 7 guys or undrafted guys that might be available to the Niners when they had decided they were going to take a look at a quarterback. So he was looking at a lot of the guys in this draft, and he liked Mordecai. And I asked him why he liked Mordecai, and he said that one of the things that came out in the process was that Tanner's coach at Wisconsin, Luke Fickell, is buddies with Greasy, and he told him of all the guys at Wisconsin that were in the draft this year, there was one guy that he would absolutely jump up and down on the table and bang the table for. It would be Tanner Mordecai, that he was a leader, that he came in and really led the guys, and great worker, great athlete, 4.4 speed. He looks really good in this camp. I mean, I thought he looked good the other day in the preseason game, but I've been impressed with him since minicamp. He just looks like he knows what he's doing out there.
Yeah, the biggest thing that jumps out to me with him is that the ball jumps out of his hands in a way that I was a little surprised by. I think he really has good arm strength, and I think that that's something that is very encouraging, because I think that when you're in this system, the scheme is going to do a lot of the work for you. But when you have a guy that can rip it the way it looks like he can, I think that's really encouraging. And I remember watching Brock Purdy's first preseason, that game against, I believe it was in Minnesota in the 2022 preseason. He had a couple throws where I was watching and I'm like, hey, if this guy is on your roster as a backup quarterback, like he's showing he can make NFL throws and he's showing he can make NFL reads. Like, this is a pretty good problem to have. You got this guy in the 7th round. Like, it's not like you're expecting this guy to come over and take over your franchise, which hilariously ended up happening. And I think there is a lot of correlation there where you're watching Mordecai. And I do think that the 49ers, in a way, are taking a more detailed approach to maybe getting some of these guys on day 3 or in the undrafted pool, where they're, the odds of hitting on a Brock Purdy again are very slim, right? Like, it's not something you can bet on year after year. But I do think that you can find quality depth in your quarterback room where you get to a point where even if you have too many and there's, not enough roster space, quarterbacks are always going to be sought after in the league. There's always going to be a team willing to give up something for a quarterback that they believe can help their football team in some way. And so I think that the 49ers are very diligent now with their approach to getting some of these guys towards the back end of the draft. And maybe you could turn them into something like, I know it feels like ages ago, but wasn't Nick Mullins after that year he had in 2018. Teams were trying to offer like day 2 picks for Nick Mullins after that 2018 season when he came in for a few games that year that Jimmy got hurt. And if you get into a position like that where you're having teams calling for your backup quarterback and, really trying to offer you substantial capital, like, it puts you in a great spot, because again, realistically, like Purdy is the guy for the foreseeable future. So we're not in a situation, I believe, where it's like, hey, this Mordecai guy looks really good. Like maybe there's a controversy down the line, but he gives you depth and he gives you options to the point where if you can decide that keeping him on the roster is the best, course of action, or flipping him for some capital down the line could be if he's a guy that keeps showing out year after year in the preseason, keeps looking really good, and teams keep hearing that, he's lighting up practice and things like that.
It's interesting. It's like, the skill set of Mordecai, it's like he's not the biggest guy, but he's not small. He doesn't have the biggest arm, but he probably has the best arm of any quarterback in this camp. He doesn't look like a great foot athlete, but he runs 4.46. It's the guy, played LSU in the bowl game 5 weeks after he broke his hand. He still threw for almost 400 yards and 3 touchdowns against a pretty talented defense. So, we'll see. We'll see. I let my eyes tell me what I see, and this guy looked really good at minicamp to me. Unspectacular like Brock, but really, really efficient and accurate. And he's carried it over into the preseason. And then I thought he looked really good the other night when he came in. He started 4 for 4, throws the ball with some good zip, runs a little bit quicker than you think. I kind of like what I saw from Tanner Mordecai. I'm eager to see do you think the 49ers one of the big questions I have is, one, who's the second quarterback? Is it Dobbs? Is it Allen? I think it's probably Allen, but Dobbs had a nice game this last game. But then maybe the bigger question is, do you keep 2 on the 53 or do you keep 3 on the 53? And if you keep 2 on the 53, then who's more, does Dobbs and Mordecai both get through waivers? Does one get through? Does one get claimed? How do you think they play their hand of cards at quarterback? Do you think they go with 2 on the active roster, 1 on the practice squad? Or do you think they try to put 3 on the active roster? Because they sure have a lot of corners that they don't want to lose.
Yeah, it's going to be really hard. And this, again, comes back to, the issues that you have when you have a team that's as talented as this and you have, more talented players in roster spots. It's, as simple as it can be, right? Like, it's just an unfortunate math equation where you put yourself in a position that you might not be able to carry the players you want to carry at certain positions because you have to make compromises elsewhere. I do wonder how much that, new rule, the third quarterback rule, factors into it, because I believe the rule states that you can, if the first 2 quarterbacks are unavailable, the third can come from a practice squad spot. And I believe they would be dressed on game day. I apologize if I'm wrong, but I believe the rule is like the third one can go and technically be a practice squad player only if the first 2 are unavailable. So I don't know if that would factor into things at all, if that is in fact the letter of the law there. Because I do think that changes the equation drastically. And as for the backup, I'll be honest, I think it should be Dobbs. Like I before the game against the Saints, I thought it should be Dobbs. I thought that at the beginning of the preseason. I have a number of reasons why, mainly just because I've seen the guy start games and be a quarterback that can contribute to wins at this level with a much less talented team. And I think you get to a point where it really depends, right? Like if Brock's out for like a game per se, right? I could see the train of thought where you're like, hey, we just need a guy to come in for a week, not make mistakes, hold down the fort and just be efficient, nothing spectacular, and let the rest of the talent on this team get us to the next week when he'll be back. But if you're looking at a prolonged stretch where you're starting quarterbacks out, for me, that's when you kind of really need to swing for the fences, and you need to understand that, like, you're in very dire straits now. You're on your number 2 quarterback in a Super Bowl window, and you need to find a way to win games. And as much as the Dobbs experience we saw last season was a just roller coaster and it had very low lows and very high highs, I think he's a guy that has the talent to help the 49ers win football games if he gets thrown out into the field. And I think the biggest difference for me between him and Allen is the rushing floor and his ability to create with his legs and extend plays with his legs, pick up yards on the ground when nothing's there. I think having that rushing floor and having that rushing ability before you even factor what he does with his arm, it gives the 49ers offense a baseline level of competency that is very difficult and hard to find when your starting quarterback is not out there. And I think it's something that shouldn't be taken for granted. So when I look at Dobbs and the physical ability that he has and the fact that we've seen flashes of him being able to win games as a starter, for me, that track record is much more valuable than anything that might be happening in practice. And I'll be honest, at the practices I was at, I didn't see enough either way where I thought one guy looked spectacular over the other. And so for me, I would lean on Dobbs' rushing ability and the fact that he has a track record as a guy that can come in and win games.
One spot that I think is really interesting going into this final preseason game is defensive end, because they lost Drake Jackson, and I think they right now, I think they're going to go 10 D linemen, 5 tackles, 5 ends, and they have 4 ends with Beal being number 4, but they don't necessarily have a 5th. And could you see the 49ers trading for a defensive end? Some people think Tyree Wilson's going to get dealt from the Raiders. I've seen Darrell Taylor's name thrown out as he could get cut by Seattle. Joseph Osai, they're saying, may get cut in Cincinnati. Dominic Robinson in Chicago, maybe the odd man looking in as far as their situation there. They have Alex Barrett. They've got some other guys. They've got some guys in camp, but I just get the feeling that they value defensive line so highly that they may look to try to trade for somebody on the outside to give them a little bit more of an established 5th defensive end. Just a guess. What do you think they ultimately do at defensive end?
If there's a guy that's available, that's proven, I think that, it couldn't hurt to take a swing. Alex Barrett's been, he's been with the team this is year 6 now, I think. Been on the practice squad most of the time, but has been a guy that's, been consistent and been available when they needed to call on his number, call on, him to come in and be a guy that can contribute, nothing spectacular, but be a guy that can, just be, eat snaps, right? Like when you're talking about the 4th, 5th defensive end, I think you're getting to a place where you're not asking for the moon, right? Like you just want a guy that's going to go out there and allow the top end guys to get a breather on the sideline and just not be a waste of space on the field. And I think Barrett is much more than that. I think he is a guy that can go out there and can contribute. So I have a really hard time seeing them have him on the final roster just based on the way the roster crunch is shaping out. But I do think that he is a guy, if you get into a pinch mid-season where if he's on the practice squad, he could be called upon and counted on in that instance. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like it's really hard. I think, at least with Beal, you have a little bit more upside, I feel like he may not be as much of a polished player just due to the NFL experience gap between the two. But I don't know. I think it's really hard to not have athletic upside when we're talking about defensive ends, and especially defensive ends under Kocurek in this attack scheme, where you're going to rely so heavily on that. So it's tough. It's tough, but I do think that Barrett is a guy where if he needs to in a pinch, he could be that guy. But for 17 games, I think that's where it gets tough because he's been with the team for 5 seasons, right? And I know they've had some really talented defensive line groups, but I don't think there's been a massive jump from year 5 to year 6 where it's like, okay, this is what we've been waiting for 5 seasons. I think he's very good at what he's been tasked to do, and I think he can continue doing that. I just don't think it's realistic to think that he's going to take this massive leap in year 6 and be, a rotational defensive lineman for 17 games.
Who do you think's running back 5 on this team? If it's CMC and Juice and JP Mason and Mitchell 1 through 4, is it Cody Schrader? Shanahan went on KMBR today and he was asked about Schrader, and he said he runs the ball really well. He said he hits the hole hard. He takes what the defense gives him. He is a very efficient runner. But then they also have Cody Schrader. They also have Isaac Guerendo. Guerendo's 225 pounds and runs in the high 4.3s. He came back to practice today. He's been out with a hamstring. Got several carries, made one really nice catch. If it comes down to an RB5, do you think they go with Schrader, who's efficient and smart, or Guerendo, who's big and fast?
I'll be honest. You know who I like, and I think it's kind of gotten lost in the shuffle a bit.
Yeah,
who? He's been hurt for a little bit. I like Patrick Taylor that they brought.
He had a great day today. He had a great day running the ball today.
I would just based on what I saw him put on film in Green Bay, and I have some friends that cover the Packers who spoke very highly of him when he first came in. I was watching him pretty closely at the practices I was at the beginning. I thought he popped more than anyone. I know Schrader's gotten a lot of the attention and he's looked good in spurts, but to me, the first couple I watched when McCaffrey was out, I was watching Taylor and I'm like, 32 looks like the best back of the bunch in my eyes. So I personally would keep him. I think that he's a player that could be a contributor on special teams if needed. I think he's a guy that could you could get good value out of that roster spot if you slot him in there. So for me, I would pick Taylor personally. I think he looked great. I don't, I don't know where he's at health wise. If he was out there today, that's great news because he was out for a couple of weeks. If he's healthy, it would be him for me personally.
He runs a little upright, but I'll tell you, man, there's a lot of athleticism there. Green Bay had this kid a few years ago, James Starks, who was a similar build, tall running back, ran upright. But Starks ran hard, and this guy runs incredibly hard. So yeah, it's gonna be interesting because he's, you think of kind of a not a big name, not a ton of production throughout his NFL career, but then you look at him and you're like, wow, man, it's a big running back with some speed and some moves. So he's gonna be fun to watch. I think in this final game as well. I expect he's going to get some run. Another guy who was fantastic in the last couple of days of practice and looked great in the game was Jacob Cowing, the 4th round pick at Arizona. Shanahan says he's still working to get reps at wide receiver, but even though he's a small kid, he's not a wimpy guy. He's a tough kid. He was kind of set back early in camp by a hamstring injury, but he competes. He maintains tremendous poise at the catch point with the ball in the air. Cowing did it at UTEP. He did it with Arizona, 2 different offenses. I wasn't sure what he was, especially after suffered the hamstring injury, but Jordan, he looks really good. I mean, really good. I would be surprised if Cowing doesn't make the team.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think he's a guy where they drafted him for his explosion and they drafted him to, be a guy who can create and who can make plays. I think that he's somebody who has flashed in the, time we got to see him in the Pac-12. For those of us on the West Coast that would watch a lot of Pac-12 after dark, I know a lot of the nation maybe couldn't have seen Arizona playing a ton as much as we are. I remember he torched USC. I think he had 4 touchdowns against USC last season. USC's defense was pretty bad. Sorry if there's Trojan fans watching, but still, he.
Are you talking about really Garendo in the bowl game?
Sorry,
are you talking about Schrader? We talking about Schrader or Garendo?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were talking about Cowing. I was talking about Cowing.
Oh, you're talking about Cowing.
Yeah.
Well, you know who he did torch SC in the bowl game, Garendo, in that final game. But you're talking about Cowing.
Yeah, Cowing went in. I think it was like week 5, 6. It was middle of the season. He went into the Coliseum and he 4 touchdowns, just torched him. And it was one of those games where he was just popping off the screen. It's Saturday night. You got Pac-12 After Dark on, and he looked the part. And I think that he's a guy too. You kind of saw it. There was that one play. It was they threw a screen to him in the slot against the Saints. I don't know if you remember this play. And he tried to cut back all the way across the field, and it went for like a loss of 1. Which in the NFL,
everybody's fast.
Very quickly, you don't run sideways. You run forward because everybody's fast. But he made 2 or 3 guys miss running through a crowded backfield, working his way across the field. He ran probably 25 yards to lose that yard. He covered a lot of distance. But watching him, just the fact that he had the confidence to do that and made guys miss in the process tells me that he knows what kind of athlete he is. And I think that as he gets more comfortable and adjusts to the speed of the NFL game and what he's going to be asked to do, I think there's a lot of upside. And the other thing is too, I know that the big thing with receivers in Shanahan's offense is you have to be a willing blocker, right? Like it doesn't matter how good you are at running routes, it doesn't matter how good you are at the catch point. If you don't block, you are not going to get snaps in this offense. And to me, from what I was able to see during the Saints game, he looked like a guy where even though he isn't the biggest, he was more than willing and the effort was there. And I think that's going to go a really long way. The fact that he is a willing blocker and he is willing to get out there and be physical. I think that's one of the things that makes Brandon Aiyuk so valuable to this team. And it's one of the reasons why I think that they are very dependent on him being a part of this team to be the best they can be. All the receiving ability is fantastic, but when we're watching these guys and they're still blocking 10, 15 yards downfield on a 3-yard run up the middle, I think it's just a mentality thing. And I think it's very important to the culture of this team. And it seems like Cowing's picked up on it very early in his tenure with the 49ers.
A lot of people feel like the 49ers lost the Super Bowl last year really because they lost on the line of scrimmage. What did they do enough in your mind in the offseason to address their whatever shortcomings they have in the line of scrimmage? I mean, Pooney, Nugent, and Kingston added to the offensive line. Malik Collins, Jordan Elliott, Leonard Floyd, the big names on the defensive line, the big new names. What do you think, Jordan? I mean, did they do enough to address their issues on the line of scrimmage, or do you still have concerns on the line of scrimmage?
I like the defensive additions a lot. I really like. I've been a big fan of Leonard Floyd's for a while. I think he's a guy where he's just so consistent. I thought he got misused early in his career when he got drafted by the Bears, and I think that Staley, coincidentally enough, in the Rams, got the best out of him when he was there. And I think he's a guy where you know what you're going to get with him. First of all, he's going to be available. He's a guy that generally doesn't miss games. I'll knock on wood as I say that, so I don't jinx anything. And he's just consistent year to year. And I think that that's really what they need opposite of Nick Bosa. They don't need this, crazy athletic upside, but you never know what you're going to get week to week. They just need a steady, proven veteran. And I think that Floyd fits the bill perfectly. Etergos Matos is very intriguing to me because I actually wrote something, I think a couple weeks ago after, I think it was, I don't know if it was a practice or if it was when we had the position coach avails, with Kosaric, where I asked him about how, his physical profile is very similar to Amenahue and can be used in a similar way. And Kosaric went into great detail about how valuable it is to have a guy that you can kick inside on passing downs and stand up over guards and have them really take advantage of the mismatches you get, where a lot of times these interior linemen aren't used to dealing with athletes of that size that also have that explosion. It's just a lot different than the 3-techs, 1-techs that they're used to dealing with on the inside. So I really like Gross Matos. And then, Jordan Elliott, like, how could you not be a fan, right? Like, this is the greatest day of my life when I got notified that the 49ers had signed a player with my name. I, all jokes aside, think he's a really good player. I think he gives the 49ers a heavier, more traditional interior defensive lineman that they've really kind of lacked on a consistent basis since DJ Jones was there. I think the issue with Kinlaw was just health never really allowed him to develop into that. I think we saw flashes of it, and I think the Jets are actually going to benefit from it more than anyone if he's able to stay healthy. But the Niners have really lacked a big, beefy interior guy that can eat gaps and can eat double teams on the inside. And I think that Jordan Elliott is a guy that fits the mold perfectly.
All those guys are individually, I think, exciting. I think Jordan Elliott's got great feet for 310 pounds, and I think Collins – has great strength and is now a much better pass rusher, technically than he was coming out. And I just feel like, they've added some solid pieces there. I really like the look of this secondary. I just think the secondary looks like it could be the strength of the team. I like if you say, give me one thing where the team's better from a year ago, I think they're better because I think they're deeper on both the offensive line and in the secondary.
Yeah, the secondary looks really good. I think that obviously it all starts with Lenore and Mooney Ward. I think that they're both just exceptional, and I think Lenore is just like right on the cusp of stardom nationally. I think 49ers fans appreciate what he does, but he's knocking on the door of being a household name in the NFL with the way he's played and the fact that he's able to go inside. In this day and age in the NFL, your slot corners are just as valuable as having a guy that can lock down on the outside. And I think that Lenore is a guy, it's remarkable how seamlessly he kicks inside and goes outside. And just the way that he's able to do it without any drop off in his game on either when he's being used either way, it's just remarkable. I really like what I saw from Isaac Yiadom early in camp. I know he's dealing with an injury now, and we'll kind of see how that plays out. But Renardo Green looks really good too. Like they have a lot of guys that look really good. Mustafa just seems like another mid-round home run pick for this team, where it's like, how are they doing this year after year where they're finding these guys that, come in and are just not only instant contributors, but clearly he's a very heady player. And I think that, that has a lot to do with the scouting process where they're trying to identify these guys. Really, really excited to see what he could do. He looked great against Tennessee. I haven't had a chance to really dive through the film yet from the Saints game, but from what I was able to see during the game, I'm with you. Like the secondary has some young guys that could be tasked with playing pretty important roles early. And I think that they feel comfortable slotting some of those guys in. And, Renardo Green is a guy where, you'd like to think you can keep Lenore long-term. I think that he's a fantastic player, but we're also getting into this position where next offseason he's due to hit free agency. You can't pay everybody. Having a guy like Green who might be able to step in if you can't pay all of your corners and retain everybody, I think is really valuable.
How about the tight end room behind George Kittle? It sounds like Eric Saubert is the favorite for to be tight end too. And then you got everybody else. You got Willis, who looks good as a receiver, but gets dominated as a blocker. There's Cam Latu, who looks like maybe the best athlete, size, speed wise of the backup linebackers. But there's a lack of urgency there. Then there's the Tongass kid from Cal. He's clearly having a good summer. There's Mason Pline, the converted basketball player from Ferris State. There's a bunch of different guys here. I mean, they actually cut Logan Thomas already, to the surprise of many, because he was the guy that had actual experience. It's Kittle, and then what at tight end? Do they go with 2? Do they go with 3? Who's tight end 2? Who's tight end 3?
I think they have to go with 3, just traditionally based on what they do and how often they are having multiple tight ends on the field. I think Saubert's a lock for tight end 2 with the way he's looked. To me, I'd be the most comfortable with him. I think he's more than earned that. It's hard, right? Because you spent a 3rd round pick on the 2, but like if we're taking draft capital out of the equation, I don't think that just purely from what we've seen on the field, I would feel confident that he's a lock to make the roster. I almost want to say it would be Kittle, Saubert, and Tonjes, but it's hard because I do see flashes with Willis too. And I think one of the big things with Willis that makes him so valuable is when he was at Oklahoma, he lined up everywhere. He'd line up in line, in the slot, in the backfield, as an H-back. Like, he did so many different things that I think having that, especially, should something happen to, Kyle Juszczyk, yes, I missed a couple games, like having a guy that can come in and fill that role and kind of do what Ross Dwelley used to do. It's really valuable, but is it valuable to the point where you might be sacrificing, like you said, some strength as a blocker that maybe another tight end would be able to bring? And that's typically what we've seen them have their 3rd tight end really excel at, is being that, dominant blocker, not as much of a receiving threat, but somebody that you can throw out there and really help this offense grind yardage out. So if I had to say right now, I would say Kittle, Saubert, and Tonjes, but I think that's probably the hardest position group to project right now beyond the starter, just because of how there's just not a proven option there anymore. I thought Logan Thomas was going to be the tight end 2 for the entire offseason, and he didn't make it through camp. So I'm really interested to see how that plays out.
Well, it is interesting because, okay, so most teams go with, like a starting tight end, and then either a young tight end they really like, or somebody that has like half of the skill set, right? So maybe he's not a great blocker, but man, this guy's a great receiver. Or this guy can't catch, but man, this guy can, he's Mercedes Lewis. He can blow you off the ball. He's a great inline blocker. It seems like you got to have one or the other. So like Kittle's your all around guy who can block and catch. Saubert is your guy who's just a blocker. So now you're looking for just a receiver, most likely, out of Braden Willis, Cam Latu, Tongass, and Pline. I kind of like Pline of the group the more I see them every day. But then, I look around football and, I see guys like the guy who was the guy, Akeem Butler, who played at Iowa State, who's like a jumbo wide receiver. Or the Eagles just drafted Johnny Wilson, I believe, out of Florida State, a jumbo receiver. Or like Buffalo just cut Chase Claypool the other day, and he could be like a jumbo receiver. I'm just kind of wondering, like, if you were running a tight end room and you got Kittle and you got a blocker in Sauerbert, would you be looking? I mean, do you like Willis, Latu, Tongass, or Pline? Or would you be looking for, that speedy guy? I kind of liked Elijah Higgins in last year's draft out of Stanford. He bounced around from Arizona to Miami or Miami to Arizona. But I kind of like the idea of that one flexed out, either jumbo receiver, undersized tight end, who's really, you're not going to ask to block very much. You're going to flex him out and use him as a big receiver. Do you like Claypool? Are you intrigued by trying to find that player around the league?
I mean, I feel like the Niners tried to find that 5 years ago when they drafted Jalen Hurd, and it unfortunately didn't work out. I feel like he would have been perfect for it. What you're describing, like that immediately went off in my head where I'm like, man, Jalen Hurd.
Or when they signed Jordan Reed. Remember when they signed Jordan Reed?
And to be honest with you, that 4 or 5 game stretch, whatever it was, when him and Kittle were both healthy during that 2020 season, that offense looked incredible. And I think that it's a shame that there hasn't been an opportunity to get another guy like that, because I think Jordan Reed was obviously so good when he was the number 1 tight end in Washington. And he was a guy that had so much athletic talent, and just the Niners basically lucked into having 2 number 1 tight ends, which is really hard to do. I don't say they lucked into, but it's a circumstance that doesn't arise very often. We're able to do it. I would love to see them try, though, because I remember those early 2010s Patriots teams when they had Rob Gronkowski and Aaron Hernandez, the mismatches they were able to generate because teams had to respect the run. They had to, be a little box heavy when there was 2 tight ends on the field. But the fact that both of those guys could carve defenses up through the air too, it created such a difficult dynamic for defenses to prepare for. And it's one thing that I would love to see while Kittle is still playing at this all-pro level. He's coming off a first-team all-pro season. It's like you said earlier, everybody's acting like everybody's, so old and these guys are all over the hill. Kittle was first-team all-pro over Travis Kelce last year. Like, he still is a very, very good football player, and I would love to see them be able to find, Jordan Reed-ish type player to complement him with.
Yeah. I mean, and it's sometimes if you find these players that are kind of like miscast, sometimes they're not hard to acquire because they flushed out as a receiver and now they're only a tight end, or they flushed out as a tight end and now they're only a receiver. I mean, usually they're not always attached to a very pricey price tag. Okay, Ricky Pearsall. Where are you with Ricky Pearsall? He was a first-round draft choice. He looks good. Ball skills are nice. But they've shielded him this summer. They've kept him out of the one-on-ones. He really hasn't done a lot of battle against all these good young corners in this Niner camp. He's been wearing the blue jersey almost all summer. And I'll tell you what I'm discouraged by. And I try not to get to, try to keep everything in perspective. But this is what's discouraging to me. This guy has faced very little physical challenges this summer. He's been in the blue jersey. They haven't hit him at all. And yet he never is healthy and always has some little malady or ding that's keeping him in this blue jersey. And now this guy is going to somehow change from every little ding and he's sitting out to he's now Julian Edelman. I mean, people are saying he kind of reminds me of Julian Edelman. Really? Julian Edelman's like one of the toughest guys to ever play in the NFL in the history of the league. This guy from Florida is one of the toughest guys ever. He doesn't look like one of the toughest guys ever to me. So I'm a little concerned, since I know that the physicality that's coming his way is far greater than what he's endured thus far. And he's done nothing but sit out. I don't know, man. I'm very concerned about the durability and the toughness and the availability this year of Ricky Pearsall. Where are you with Pearsall?
I'll be honest. I try to really be patient early on with guys, especially with injuries like the soft tissue stuff, where it doesn't feel like it's, like I don't think it's necessarily a issue where the NFL game is causing these injuries and it's like this adjustment to the NFL and the speed and the physicality is what's causing it. I think it's just been a little bit unfortunate. And we've even heard that Pearsall was a guy where in college at Arizona State and at Florida, he had to be taken off the field because he overworked himself, because the guy was always practicing and always going 100 miles an hour and always giving it his all. And his coaches kind of had to, sit him down and be like, hey, we appreciate the effort, but we need you to be healthy and you're going to overwork yourself. So I think from load management standpoint, like maybe there's some adjustments that need to be made there, and learning how to take care of your body in the NFL and what the demands are a lot different than college. And that could maybe be a situation they're dealing with now. But I don't think that there's anything that I'm watching where I'm like, man, this is really concerning to me. Or it's not like, I don't think he has like a chronic condition where it's like, his knee could go out at any time because he has this chronic medical condition, right? Like if it was something like that, I would be a lot more concerned. I just think it's been unfortunate luck early on, and it's highlighted much more so because he was a first-round pick, and the 49ers, arguably their best receiver last season, statistically their best receiver last season, isn't in camp right now because they're dealing with the contract stuff. If Aiyuk was in camp and catching 15 balls a day, I think people will be a lot more patient with Pearsall. I don't know if you would personally, but I think that in general, there would be a little bit more patience with what we've seen. But I think with Aiyuk not being there, it's like, okay, well, they drafted this guy 31 overall. He better be ready to go week 1. And I just don't think that's the reality. And I don't think that that's a fair expectation based on the way that the preseason's gone. I think that it's just not realistic to expect this guy to go out there and hit the ground running right away. And that also means that it might take a little bit of time. It's just, I don't think that this early in his first season, it's fair to write the guy off or to have a super pessimistic outlook.
Couple last ones with Jordan Eliott as he's with us on the Krueger show as we're coming down the home stretch. All right. When you look around pro football, is there a team that you look at this year and say, you know what, I kind of like them as my surprise team? Is there a team out there that you kind of have your eye on as a team that we all maybe should watch out for this year in the NFL? You know the way the NFL is. It's like every year, like 5 or 6 teams that weren't in the playoffs make the playoffs. 5 or 6 teams that were in the playoffs fall short. Teams that had the finish with the best records get the tougher schedules. Teams with the worst record inherit easier schedules. What do you think? Who's the team that you're like, you know what, watch out for this team this year?
I don't have one. If it's okay, could I give you a couple just because
Sure.
there's not one that stands out. I'll be honest. I think the 49ers just played one of them. I think the Saints are going to be a lot better than people expect. I think there's a lot of assumption that they're going to be like this bottom 5 team. They're not going to be great. I think their defense looks fantastic. I think they're going to have a really good defense. I think Dennis Allen is very good at scheming up that side of the ball. I understand the hesitancy sometimes with Derek Carr. There's not like this, spectacular quarterback play, but I think he's, a proven NFL starter. Chris Olave is fantastic. I think with Shaheed, they have some dynamic playmaking ability. If Kamara can stay healthy, I know he's getting up there and he has a lot of mileage, but he's still a really good player. Like looking at that team, I'm like, this could be a team in a division where you don't really know what you're going to get. They could win 10, 11 games and be a team that surprises people. The one that I think might surprise a lot of people is I think the Arizona Cardinals are going to be a lot better than people think, Larry. I think the Arizona Cardinals are going to be like a tough opponent. And I think that I would be surprised if the 49ers beat them both times this season. And I know we've gotten to this point where the 49ers effectively swept the division each of the last 2 seasons. They lost that week 18 game when Sam Darnold and Carson Wentz played. Technically they didn't, but I don't really, count that because that game was, it didn't matter. The Niners already had the 1 seed. In the games where the starters were playing, they were 11-0 over the last 2 seasons, and they've just ran over the NFC West. Arizona with Kyler healthy, with Marvin Harrison Jr. there now, like the way that Gannon's got that team rolling a little bit, I thought towards the end of the season last year. I think their defense still needs some work. They're still a few pieces away, but they've retooled that offensive line a little bit. They've got some promising pieces on the offensive side of the ball. I think Arizona's a team where you go into it thinking, hey, we beat this team really badly the last few years, and you kind of expect it to happen again. And then it's the 3rd or 4th quarter and you're in a dogfight with them. And it's this tough battle. Like for me, that's where I would be like a little hesitant of, thinking the 49ers are just going to run over the NFC West, because I'm looking at, the division on paper. I would probably say that Arizona is the worst team right now. And I think Arizona is still going to be a pretty good team. So I think the NFC West as a whole this year might surprise a lot of people. I think it's going to be one of the better divisions in football.
I'm going Arizona. I'm going Atlanta in the NFC. I just think, Atlanta's, they're ready to play here. I mean, they got Bijan. They've got Cousins, they've got Penix, they've got, Kyle Pitts, they got a good offensive line, Drake London, Darnell Mooney, Ray. They added some good players, I think, from the 49ers to solidify things. Guys like Warner and Dwelly are solid players. And then Grady Jarrett and Onyemata on that front line with Zach Harrison. And there's some good players on the back end there with AJ Terrell and Jesse Bates. Justin Simmons was signed, so they've got Simmons and Bates and Terrell and Alford, Mike Hughes, Clark Phillips. I like their secondary. I like Atlanta. I think Atlanta, Raheem Morris, a really underrated coach, and I think Jimmy Lake's a good defensive coach. So I like Atlanta in the NFC to be kind of my surprise team. In the AFC, it's a little bit more difficult to find kind of that surprise team. I don't know that I have like a true surprise team. I like the Texans. I think the Texans are going to be a tremendous team. I just think the Texans are Tank Dell, and now you got Diggs, and you got good tackle play, young quarterback, and you added Daniil Hunter off the edge. I mean, what a stud he is. They lost some guys up front as well, but they just have so much. I like Houston and Atlanta are as kind of my teams that kind of could surprise this year. I don't even know if they'll be really surprise teams, but I think they're both good contenders. How about Super Bowl hangover? How concerned are you about that for the Niners?
Okay, so it's so funny. I'm really glad you brought this up. I've been having this discussion with a few for like weeks about this, where my whole take is I don't believe in Super Bowl hangovers, and I will add context to this by saying that it's very difficult to win a Super Bowl the year after winning one. It's also really difficult to win the Super Bowl the year after losing one, right? Like, there's a reason why so few teams do go back to back. And we're thinking about the last two teams to do it. Who were the two quarterbacks? It was Tom Brady and Patrick Mahomes. And both of those circumstances took, heroics, and you have these last minute field goals by Vinatieri 20 years ago. You have Mahomes played out of his mind against the Chiefs against the Eagles on a sprained ankle. And then the game against the Niners was a coin flip that could have gone either way, right? Like, so many things have to go right. And even if you have this crazy talented quarterback, which is the ultimate equalizer in football, still so many things have to go right. So I don't really think it's as much about like, oh, we lost the Super Bowl and everybody's, all, upset about it. And it's this emotional hangover that we're dealing with. Like, yeah, I think there's a human element, of course. Like, it's gut wrenching to lose a game, especially when you've been this close. But if we look back at the last few seasons of 49er football, they've been in the NFC Championship game in each of the last 3 seasons, right? Like, they've been right there. And it's like, if we're talking about 5 or 6 plays maybe total over the last 3 seasons, or if those plays go differently, plays you could count probably on one hand, let's say 5. The Niners are 3-time Super Bowl champions, and they're three-peating, right? Like, so to me, I don't think it's as much about like this emotional hangover from losing the game as much as it's just like it's really, really difficult to get to the Super Bowl in the NFL, let alone do it back-to-back seasons, let alone do it when you have an aging roster, or you might have injuries, or you might have roster turnover where guys are really hard to replace. And I think the biggest thing that you kind of look at from last season is they had a pretty good run of health, right? Like, they got pretty lucky that there weren't any major, season altering injuries that really changed the course of their season, in my opinion. It's really hard to get that luck 2 years in a row in a game that's this physical. So if the 49ers don't make it back to the Super Bowl this season, I think that there are a million reasons we could point to before just saying, hey, it was a Super Bowl hangover and this curse continues, where they lost the Super Bowl and they got back. And it's like, we've seen teams lose the Super Bowl and get back. The Patriots lost that Super Bowl to the Eagles in 2017, and they got back the next season and won. Like, it's not an unprecedented thing. It's just really, really hard to do.
Last one, the cutdown. It's coming up. It's 6 days away. It's the 27th, and I think that's Tuesday. I expect most of the teams to pare their rosters down on Saturday morning. Everybody's going to play Friday night. And then I think on Saturday, you're going to see most of the teams pare it down. The deadline's Tuesday. Some teams will wait till the very last second. A lot of teams will get out in front of it and do it early. what are you looking for at the deadline, or who are you looking for, or what exactly position wise? And I bring this up because this is one of my favorite times of year when they kind of reshuffle, right? So like they have free agency. And this is the beautiful part about the NFL, I think, personnel wise. They have free agency in March and you address your needs. And some teams sign guys and some teams don't. And then here comes the draft in April and you address your needs. And some teams, wind up addressing their needs twice and then have a surplus. Other teams strike out in free agency and strike out in the draft, and they get to the summer and they still have a hole. So you get to the summer, and a lot of times there's a reshuffling of the rosters and everything kind of evens out. Some team may have, like the Niners, 8 or 9 or 10 NFL caliber corners, but only maybe 3 or 4 good defensive ends. So maybe the Niners need to pick up a defensive end. I bring this up because I was reading some articles about one guy that could be cut by every team in the league. Just kind of get a sense of who's on the chopping block, who's on the bubble. 2 names that really intrigued me that if they were cut, man, if I were the 49ers, I think I would try to sign them. One is the burner from the Rams, the super fast wide receiver, Tutu Atwell. Tutu Atwell runs in the like high 4.2s or low 4.3s. He's super fast. And I know they've got Cowing, and I know they tried Danny Gray. But, man, if a guy like Tutu Atwell was free, man, I just think I would love to have that kind of game breaker speed on my offense. The other one is if the Raiders are really going to move on from Tyree Wilson this quickly after drafting him, if I'm the Niners, man, watching Kasarik turn, Arden Key into something and Ebukam into something, I think a guy like Chris could turn a player like that, Tyree Wilson into a major, bull rushing monster opposite Bosa. And I'd love to see it. Those, to me, I'm looking for a defensive end or just somebody who's a speedy game breaker to add to this mix at the cutdown. Is there anybody that you're looking for, Jordan, or any position? What are you looking for at the cutdown? Because you know the way it works. There's always somebody around the league that you'd rather have than the guys in your own camp.
Man, I'll be honest, Larry. Like this year, there's not really a position where I'm like, oh, this is where they could really stand to upgrade. Like I think they're really well rounded, and I think they have so many good players on the 90-man roster right now that there's not a situation where I see them cutting 37 of them and then going to make a 38th or 39th cut to fit in somebody from another team, unless it would have to be, like you said, a spectacular, kind of player where it's too good to pass up. And, for maybe there is a defensive lineman out there that's like, I'd love to come in for a year under Kasarik and boost my value and hit free agency next year. If something like that does come up, absolutely you have to weigh your options. But I think they have just their hands full as is, dictating who they're going to cut from their own roster. And because they have so many talented players on their roster right now, what I'll be watching for, honestly, is I really want to know what they do with linebacker. I think they have all of the linebackers are really impressive to me. If there was no, if there was let's say it was a 63-man roster, I'd keep all 7 that are healthy right now because I think all 7 of them are really good. And I think that they're all players that can contribute to winning football. Shameless plug here. I wrote an article about Curtis Robinson a couple days ago for anybody who's been watching and seeing how good he's looked during the preseason. He's a guy I just can't envision a scenario where they cut him. I think that he's been a guy. He looked great to me at Stanford, played in the Bay Area, so people might have already been familiar with him from his college days. Showed flashes in previous preseasons, was a contributor on special teams when he was called upon the last couple seasons. What I love about the mentality is he had an opportunity to join Tennessee's 53-man roster last season, and he decided to stay with the 49ers on the practice squad because he felt like learning from Johnny Holland and Fred Warner and Drake Greenlaw was the best course of action for his long-term development and his sustained success in the NFL, where you couldn't fault anybody for taking the not only prestige of being elevated from the practice squad to a full-time roster, but there's considerable financial gain in that too. And he bet on himself and bet on the fact that he thought staying here, that he could earn his way to a roster spot here. And I think he's done that personally. I think he's been great in practice when I've watched.
Yep.
I think he's been great on the field. The only thing that throws me off is a linebacker wearing 36. I know he was 59 before. I'm assuming there was some sort of, veteran hierarchy with Devondre Campbell coming in. But he's fantastic. And so I'm really interested to see what they do, Larry, because, Tatum Bethune, the 7th-round rookie from Florida State, he's looked good too. Jalen Graham's a guy that's looked good. D. Winters made the team last year as a rookie. He looks like he's gotten even better. It's hard to see them cutting him. I know from the consensus for when I'm seeing it on social media and stuff, a lot of people think that Flanagan Fowles is the odd man out, but he's played 70 games for the 49ers. He's played 9 playoff games. He's been a special teams guy. He's been exactly what you'd want out of a depth linebacker, as somebody that could get thrown into the fire and hold their own, which he's done. So I think the hardest, either tight end or linebacker, those are the 2 positions I'm watching the most, because I think those are the most difficult decisions I'll have to make. Traditionally, they've carried 6 linebackers, and they have 7 right now that are really good. I don't know that they'll be able to sneak any of them onto the practice squad because of how good they are. So you might get into a situation where the linebacker they traded to Denver a couple years ago, it was Jonas Griffith, I think, or Jonas Griffith.
Yep.
You might end up in a situation like that where it's like, hey, let's not risk losing this guy for nothing on waivers. We might have to trade a guy for a 5th or 6th round pick if we're able to get it, because I just don't see a scenario where they get one of those guys through to the practice squad.
I agree. I really hope they don't move Jalen Graham, because I think Graham's a star. I think he is really, really good. And then Bethune is just showing up at the football. He's got 18 tackles in 2 football games, and he's looking great in practice. And I totally agree with you on Curtis Robinson. It's amazing, the transformation of Curtis Robinson. I mean, if you changed up the numbers and moved the stands back an extra 40, 50 feet, I bet you could give him Fred Warner's number and fool everybody that it's Fred Warner. I mean, this guy moves so well. He's playing so well. Curtis Robinson right now is really, really exciting. I mean, he's always been a great athlete with great measurables, but then he was always smart, but he needed to really kind of put it all together. Well, here it is now, a few years in, and he's put it all together, and he is absolutely going to make this team. And yet, the rest of these guys, Winters looks good, Bethune looks good, Graham looks good. You're right. I would hate to be in charge of cutting any of those guys, because all those guys can play. I mean, I don't think there's a guy that can't play there. And Flanagan Fowles, he might be the odd man out. We'll see. I'd hate to see them cut Bethune, because Bethune's just been so amazing with production, but can't cut Graham. I mean, I think Graham's the best of them. Of the young guys they got there, I think Graham's the best of them. A lot of people think Winters is. I kind of side with Graham, but all 3 of those guys are really, really special. That's going to do it for us. And, of course, we are brought to you by Mancini Sleepworld. Mancini's is a proud sponsor of the Krueger Show. Just got my Mancini's bed. It's awesome. Mancini's offers a 120-night guarantee. With a range of brands and price points with Mancini's, you get free next-day delivery. So click the link below or go to sleepworld.com and find a bed that works for you. Whether shopping online or visiting in store, use the code KRUG10 and you can get 10% off. That's KRUEG 10, and you'll get 10% off in-store or online at sleepworld.com. So once again, you can be in the store, you can be online at sleepworld.com. You go order a bed, you type in KRUG10 when you're typing in your code, and you will get 10% off. So heck, you might save $200-$300 on a mattress courtesy of the Krueger Show. So type in Krug10, you get 10% off. That's either in store or online at sleepworld.com. Jordan, awesome stuff, man. Promote what you got cooking. I know you're on NBC Sports Bay Area's website and producing all kinds of great content. Tell people what you're working on next. Is there a feature or a story that we should be looking for?
Yeah, absolutely. I wrote one a couple days ago on Curtis Robinson, who we were just talking about, and I know there's a lot of interest in after he flashed. It's on NBCSportsBayArea.com right now. All great Bay Area sports content around the whole Bay Area. If you got a team you root for here, we're covering it. I'm so lucky to be a part of such a great team there. But if you're looking for 49ers specific stuff, I did write a feature on Curtis Robinson on Tuesday, I believe. So it's still relatively new. And it was just about his growth, how his development behind the scenes is translating on the field now, and why I think he's poised for a roster spot. I'll give you this. This might have, the measurables might have changed a bit because I tweeted this on September 1st, 2022. But Curtis Robinson is 6'3". As of September 1st, 2022. I'll clarify. Curtis Robinson, 6'3", 235 pounds, 4'6", 40, 4'26", 20-yard shuttle. Fred Warner, 6'3", 236 pounds, 4'6", 40, 4'28", 20-yard shuttle. So when I've noticed that, there is a bit of a consensus where it's like, man, this guy, he moves like Warner out there a little bit. And Fred Warner is the best linebacker in football. So I'm not comparing Curtis Robinson to Fred Warner because I think that that's just not a fair comparison to make for anybody. But if we're just talking about measurables, there are very favorable measurables that have helped Warner turn into the player he is. And I think Robinson having very similar measurables isn't a coincidence. And I think it's a reason why he is in a position to be a contributor on this team. I just thought it was crazy how eerily similar some of those numbers were across the board.
It's amazing what, everybody thinks that you've either arrived or, you are what you are when you get to the NFL. And nothing could be further from the truth. In reality, the guys who work really hard, the guys who keep developing their body, their mind, their game, they look up 2-3 years in and they realize, they're on the verge of making great money, or they're, on the verge of setting their family up for life because they put in that work. And, for every guy that comes into the league and is a finished product, there's 10 guys that, need to kind of work the first couple of years to kind of figure out what they're going to become. And this is a perfect example. I mean, Curtis Robinson's a great athlete, really smart guy, and was smart enough to understand that this was a great place for him to be. And didn't try to say, hey, you know what? Sometimes things don't happen at work for you, and we blame the person at work, and then we want to leave, right? Let's move, let's transfer, let's leave jobs. Well, here's a guy that things weren't going right, but he said it to us the other day in the auditorium. He's like, I looked around, there's Dre Greenlaw, there's Fred Warner. I knew this was the room I wanted to be in. I knew these were the guys I wanted to learn from. Johnny Holland's a tremendous coach, and he put in the work. He put his head down. He did his he was a diligent worker. He, learned things from everybody, including Johnny. And here he is. And he's about to have the best year of his career. And you can absolutely sense it. And now he's kind of a leader in the room. And these guys are really looking up to him. So I really respect the hell out of Curtis Robinson. I can't wait to read your piece on him. That's going to do it for us. Thanks to everybody. Thanks to our sponsors. Thanks to Jordan. Jordan, have a great night, man. Thanks for jumping in on the Krueger show. Great to see you, man. Last time we saw you didn't have the stash. Now you got the stash, man. Look at that thing.
I'm trying, man. It's not great, but I'm trying. It's not for lack of effort. I promise you guys. But I just, I figured I'd try it as long as I can until I get bullied into shaving it off. So we'll see. I've stood firm. I've held my ground, but we'll see how long it lasts. But I'm trying.
Follow this guy on Twitter at Splash Cousin, right?
Yeah.
At Splash Cousin on X, and he's fantastic. NBC Sports Bay Area. Whether he's writing on the Niners, the Giants, the Warriors, the A's, whatever it is, the guy's absolutely fantastic, and we're excited to have him. So, Jordan, thanks again. Thanks to all of you guys. Have a great night, everybody. Peace. Thanks for supporting the Krueger Show on YouTube.
Yeah, never met a man I've been scared of. Can't